Next up, we're going to take a look at the doggy bed, which is very simple, but we're going to use it as an example to show how we can actually paint things like stitches into our materials. So let's go ahead, click new, and the doggy bed's pretty small, so I'm just going to do 1024 texture, and I'm going to select that doggy bed. And you can see here that we're doing an automatic UV unwrapping. And here we go, we have it loaded in. So I also want to take an opportunity to bring up again Substance Source. And one of the great things about Substance Source is that when you are creating kind of stylized materials and things, they actually have a very large selection of stylized materials already made. So if I open up Substance Source here and I search stylized, they actually released a very, very large stylized pack not that long ago. And you can see that you have all of these options here. And you don't have to use this. You can use one of the fabrics they have in there, but I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of send this stylized wool over so we can use that on our dog bed as well. There are plenty of fabric materials that come by default, but I just want to show some of these stylized materials they have. There's a lot of great ones here, including this kind of stylized hay ground and the stylized rocks and woods that are really useful when you're trying to create a more kind of painterly atmosphere in your piece. So let's go ahead here, and first we're going to apply a kind of smart material to the overall thing. So let's go ahead and under our smart materials, now by the prefix that Substance Painter uses for kind of fabric and things and cloth and all of that is they actually use fabric. So most of the time you can find most of kind of the cloth like the materials they have if you search fabric. And we're going to use this kind of flannel later on as an example to show how we can adjust the parameters to get the checker to work with our UV. But here, we're just going to kind of use that so that we have the same material, but we're actually going to go in here and delete those patterns. So we'll go ahead and delete the pattern horizontal here, and we can delete the pattern vertical, and that will leave us with just kind of a flannel material. So once we've deleted those patterns, we can take a look at some of these other options we have here. So we have the base flannel, and we can go ahead and change that to a kind of dark blue, and I think that'll be kind of complementary to some of what we're working with later. And then we can take a look at all the different options we have here. So we kind of have these patterns on here with the fill, and that's kind of what's getting it that look. Now, Substance Painter isn't really meant to create materials, but it does have so many tools in it that you can go ahead and kind of create materials, which is what they're kind of doing here with this base flannel. And we can come up and take a look at these other options. So we kind of have the folds that are generated in there, and we have this kind of fiber general wear, and we have these clumps, and those are kind of also red. So we're going to want to kind of go ahead, change those to blue, go up here, grab this pink. We'll want to change that to a blue. And I want this to be kind of a lighter blue there. Come up here, and we have discoloration. So this is just going to kind of add like some color variety. Again, we'll kind of push this to blue there. And really, Substance Painter is amazing for saving you time on everything, and really the only time you ever are going to kind of spend a lot of time creating a material is when you're painting it from scratch, or when you're kind of going in and having to adjust the parameters on all of these pieces. Let's go ahead and maybe make, actually I'm gonna leave kind of the threading disruption in that kind of orangish color to kind of show almost like the pattern's completely worn away down to the fibers. Now this is a smart material, so we need to go ahead and bake the mesh maps. And sometimes I kind of like to work before I do the smart materials up front here so that I can kind of just kind of see the material pure splatted on there before all the curvature and everything kind of plays a role into making it look better. So let's go ahead, bake these mesh maps. And we can see that now retroactively all those folds and things have been applied, and that we're kind of getting our materials around here. Now we're zoomed way in, and you can see that it's getting kind of blurry, but we're not planning on being that close. We'll be kind of about out here probably in our final render. So even though these look kind of blurry up front because we're at a lower resolution, that shouldn't be an issue long term. So we can go back and we kind of play with our colors a bit. I still think it looks a bit saturated, and you can see here that we kind of have these bright blues, but it's on a subtract mode. And again, if you're familiar with Photoshop, always make sure that you're paying attention to the blending modes over here. So let's go ahead, take a look. And I do think that that brightness may still be coming from the base material. So let's go ahead and desaturate that just a bit because we're kind of looking for a more kind of rustic flannel color, which are generally a bit more desaturated. And it's still got a little bit of a purple, which I believe is kind of coming from this one here. So we can go ahead and desaturate that a bit. And with there, we got a blue I'm pretty happy with. Now let's take a look at that material we brought in. So we have that smart material, and we can just type in stylized and it should pop up. And we can see we have the stylized wool here, and we can drag this on top here. And that drug into my folder by default. So I'm just gonna come back over here, close that folder, drag above. And we can see here that that's applying there. That's way too large, of course. I'm gonna change this to triplanar. And then I'm going to scale this up to, let's maybe try 3. I'm pretty happy with the scale of that. Now this is kind of a white wool, and we do have these presets here that we have damaged orange brown wool and kind of clean blue gray wool. I'm happy with the default settings there. I just want to change the color of the wool, but you can see here, this is an example where we have more options of kind of weathering density. So if you want, you can kind of make some of those kind of like little tears that occur in wool a little less, and you can kind of crank dirt up. But I'm going to just leave the dirt down. I'm going to go ahead and just change the color there to be slightly more yellow. I think that'll kind of pair well with the blue. There we go. Let's go ahead, add a black mask. Let's come into our projection here. And we'll talk a little bit more about color theory and things like that later on in the series. And we'll talk about getting more of that painterly look and specifically how to get a stylized look. Right now, I just want to teach you the tools. So you can see here that everything's on one mesh. So we need to switch over here to UV. We can just click UV, and now we've kind of filled that little UV island in there. I also want to take this as an opportunity that you can change the wireframe settings up here. If you click the display settings, come down here. So for example, this red color works great on the blue, but let's say that we had a same color wireframe as a material. You can come in here, change those settings. I usually like setting mine to kind of bright green and then setting my opacity down to like 15. And very rarely do you have kind of green screen green appearing in any of our colors naturally. So with that, that kind of gives us a little like base material to start with there. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and add a stylized material on there to maybe add some kind of wear around the edges. So we can look at doing that now. Let's go ahead. Let's add a fill layer and kind of show you how we can kind of play with colors there. And we can right click and we can copy mask. Then we can right click here, and then we can add a black mask, and then we can click that mask. We can right click and hit paste into mask. And now this fill layer will only apply there. And as we mentioned before, if we come over here into the kind of normal and height, you can see that it's linear dodge, and that's kind of great because now we can kind of paint in dirt details and things like that, and it'll inherit the height of the texture below it because we're not wanting to change the height of kind of the wool. We just kind of want to change the color to add a little bit of dirt. So now what we can do, so we can come to the smart mask here and we can kind of pick a mask, and I want something that's going to kind of just add a little bit overall. So I'm just going to grab this dirt, drag that on there. And again, we're going to take this one, and now that we've dragged this generator on there, it's kind of generating a new mask, so it's applying it to everything. So what we can do is we can actually take this and we can group it, or we can just create a folder and put it in that folder, and we can call this mud. We can put that mud in there. And then what we can do is, again, add a black mask here, copy this mask, paint into this mask, and then now that'll only be applied there. And you can see it's already adding variation, and I'm just gonna kind of leave it to the default settings there. With that, we kind of have a little dog bed. If you want, you could get more detailed and kind of maybe paint around the edges more.